So, based on true events, Angel Studios' latest film, Rule Breakers, is a story of how one visionary woman empowered a team of young Afghan ladies to defy the oppressive cultural expectations and just learn to dream of more for their lives. Will the film follow the lead of its heroes and defy convention with an exciting and original story? Or is this just another paint by numbers Hollywood underdog story? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So this film, it's set in the recent past in Afghanistan and follows the person of Roya Mahabub, who is an intelligent, self-taught kind of computer expert and really more just a passionate advocate for women's education in a country that largely prohibits it. And kind of to that end, she ultimately assembles the Afghan Dreamers, which is an all-girl robotics team of brilliant young women with the aspiration not just to win international robotics competitions, but really to make an emphatic statement for the whole world to see just about the untapped potential of girls in her country. And while this probably isn't among my very favorite movies that have come out of Angel Studios, I did really enjoy this film. It's kind of the sort of movie that I just found myself slowly buying into more and more as it went along, until realizing that I was fully invested in this story and in these characters by the end. I think kind of part inspirational underdog story, part female empowerment, advocacy film. I think Rule Breakers doesn't necessarily reinvent the wheel, but it's just a very entertaining and meaningful story brought to life with just a ton of heart and earnestness. Now, while the young characters within the film defy expectations with this remarkable courage, Rule Breakers itself unfolds as a mostly conventional underdog drama. And to be clear, that's not necessarily a bad thing to me. I think in a genre that often does thrive on more feel-good vibes, more than it does shocking twists and turns. Still, I think there probably won't be too many surprises for anyone that's familiar with the genre. And while it may be somewhat predictable, I think it is a really well done version of that storytelling template that hits all the familiar beats really well. And I just found it to be a very engaging story, really from start to finish. I think also setting the story within the relatively unfamiliar, at least for me, world of robotics does give it a bit of a fresh perspective. And then also just sort of the the underrepresented kind of cultural backdrop and I think thematic significance of the film does give it a higher sense of stakes that I think transcends merely winning or losing some athletic contest. The robotics competitions themselves, I think, are quite interesting, if not necessarily always overly riveting. I think kind of unlike traditional sports films where points are scored in real time and there's just always a clear sense of how the team is doing relative to the competition. Maybe I'm just sort of a dummy, but I wasn't always totally clear what the actual objectives were, and mostly would just sort of wait to see what the judges decided. But I think at its core, Rule Breakers is not really a movie about robots. It's a movie about people. And I think the people that are in the film are compelling. They are riveting. I think actress Nicola Boucheri gives a very captivating and nuanced performance in this kind of central role of Roya, where most of the film's first act focuses on her individual journey. Although as the story progresses, she almost kind of falls increasingly into the background as she passes the torch to the younger characters. And I think intentionally or not, I just found that to be almost a beautiful way to embody one of this film's overarching themes of just empowering the next generation. And it helps too that I think the younger cast in this are up for the challenge. I think each of the four young actresses who do form the all-girl robotics team are equally great, kind of balancing the wide-eyed wonder and vulnerability with just a quiet sense of strength and determination. Now, I think valid or not, kind of a common criticism to these sort of female empowerment stories is the kind of tendency for Hollywood to reduce its female characters in a very simplistic way to a so-called girl boss, kind of by placing them on a lofty pedestal as almost perfect saints that kind of look down with just disdain on men. But thankfully, I did not find that to be the case at all with Rule Breakers. The women, they're obviously very brilliant and I think easy to root for, but they're also young, confused, just overwhelmed by the flood of new experiences. And you see them stumble over their words or be crippled by doubt and insecurity. I think in ways that allows sort of their imperfect humanity to shine through in a more powerful way. The cast, they're excellent, but I did find that the film doesn't always like utilize them to their fullest potential. And by that, I mean that there are times when it feels like that the film is more about like the message and almost like what the characters represent rather than like how they are navigating the events like as unique individuals. And I appreciate like the big important messages in this film. But I think for me, this film is at its best when it does focus more on like the internal conflicts, such as like a kind of fish out of water moment where the girls all sneak out to visit a dance club and just experience the very like stark clash of cultures, or like, another scene where one of the girls really just wrestles with the cultural and like religious weight of like guilt and shame at having touched a boy by shaking his hand. And speaking of religion, Angel Studios, they've earned a reputation, I think, for being like a hub for quality faith-based films in recent years. But at least to my own knowledge, I think Rule Breakers represents one of the first projects for them to venture outside of like kind of that more narrow subgenre and to tell a story that represents like another religious faith. Because as Afghans, like the characters are, I think, understandably Muslim, although like how devoutly is left unclear. But they are shown in several scenes to be like voicing prayers to Allah. I think like the religious aspects do seem to be more just like a part of their characterization rather than being like pushed in any kind of preachy way. I think like, as a whole, this film is far from affirming all of Muslim teaching or culture. But still, I think, Christians that are looking for like only cinema that reflects their own kind of religious beliefs won't find it here. But for me, personally, I don't have any problem with stories that, are told from different cultural or like religious perspectives. And I do think like consistent with this kind of film's theme of boundary breaking and just sort of acceptance, there is a shared humanity and I think like a timely message that really viewers of all faiths can affirm and appreciate. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, really nothing at all. I think this is a PG film. For language, the only thing I caught is there are several uses of like God's name, although it may be used more like prayerfully than as a curse. For violence, there are a couple like kind of moments of terrorism where in one scene where a man fires a gun on a car, although no one is hurt in the act. And then later a car bomb explosion that does result in some deaths, although like the characters of the deceased bodies are not shown. And for sexuality, nothing in this film. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface for this, I think Roya Mahaboob's kind of passionate crusade was to fight for like women's freedom and education. But I think kind of in like a broader level, Rule Breakers really is just about fighting for like the vulnerable and like, the change needed to make a better world. And there are some like good moments of dialogue that I appreciated, such that there's like an early scene where Roya attempts to convince one of the young girl's dad to like, allow her to join the robotics team, to which he says, if the world was a different place, I would say yes. And then she counters, how will the world ever change unless men like you start saying yes? Kind of later to continue saying, I am the daughter of a father who said yes to me and it gave me wings. And unless more fathers start saying yes, we will always live in fear. And according to Roya, and I think by extension, this film, really all people are faced with the choice either to accept the safer and I think less costly path of just, going with the status quo or being part of the movement that brings about a better world. But as we all know, change, it is not easy. And kind of all throughout this film, Roya struggles just with like the burden of her mission and kind of like the seemingly impossible task of just changing the course of her country. And bemoaning like the fact that she only has the opportunity to like invest in a very limited number of girls, she despairs that it is only a drop in the ocean. It's not changing anything. But another kind of character, I think, wisely reminds her, but it is changing things for those girls. And so cultural change doesn't happen overnight or in the absence of great sacrifice, but it has to start somewhere. And while no one person can change the world, we all have the power to make a world of difference in the life of the people around us. I think that is a very positive message that Christians and really any other viewer can take to heart. So, in the end, I think Rule Breakers is a delightful story with a very strong message that is almost both inspirational and challenging in equal measure. I think as a film, Rule Breakers may not break the mold in any significant way, but with a very powerful true story and a very earnest presentation, I do think it effectively elevates some very courageous characters who did, and hopefully it will also inspire other people to follow their lead. But hey, I'd love to hear what you thought if you check this movie out in theaters. Don't be shy, jump into the comment section, let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so too, I encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider, got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching, stay safe, and continue to collide through the world for Christ.